Welcome to Horticulture, where a group of extension professionals and plant people talk about the business, production, and joy of planting seeds and helping them grow. Join us as we explore the culture of horticulture.
Hello, constant listeners. This is not the voice of Alexis that you normally hear leading us into conversation because the holidays are upon us. And if you have listened to us before during the last holiday season, you'll know that this is typically the time of year where we do some short topic podcast, a couple of episodes here and there. And that's what we're doing today. And I think next week we're going to do one of those short form podcast topics as well. But that's what we're going to be doing today. As we're recording this, it's not quite yet to Thanksgiving, but as you are listening to this, we will just have been finished up with Thanksgiving. But I have to ask you, Jessica Besson, who is also a regular host. It's just Jessica and I today. The rest of the
Hey.
podcast crew, hey, Jessica. The rest of the podcast crew, normal crew, is off doing big things and getting ready for the holidays. But Jessica and I both are probably scrambling, preparing for Thanksgiving. Jessica, are you ready?
I hope so. I have another grocery pickup because I am making 4
Wait a
corn
minute.
casseroles.
Do you go shopping in the store? Or do you have a delivery service come to
Well,
you?
I
We need to know
know
these
I
things.
normally go shopping, or my husband was nice enough to go and get, like, some of the stuff, and
Yeah.
then I realized I forgot to tell him that I need, like, all the cheese, all of it, right?
There's
Like
never enough cheese.
yes, and so I'm actually today, just for the ease of things, have made, like, one of those lists, like, click lists where I can go and drive and pick it up real quick on my way home.
Yeah.
But yeah, I have 4 corn casseroles to make, so 4 different Thanksgiving dinners coming up.
And
Um,
now corn casseroles, not corn pudding, and I think there's a difference, isn't there?
there is a difference. I have realized that some people really like their corn pudding, which is more we were talking about, like, not Jell-O-like, but what would you say it's like?
The corn pudding that I've had is more like pudding-like than a casserole, which has more, I don't know what you would call it, structure maybe, sometimes a topping of
Right.
crumbly somethings? Yeah.
Yeah, like stuff on top are a little more fluffier, right? Like
Yes,
ours has like
lighter in consistency,
corn
yeah.
muffin mix in it.
Oh,
So,
nice.
yeah, so I'm clearly making that because it's like one I can like do with my eyes closed and make easily with 2 small children and
Oh,
take
yeah,
it and it travels
yes.
well. So,
So you've made all the considerations, what you can do in a fair amount of time with 2
yeah,
children and farm chores and also what
all of
travels
that
well. So
and
you've made
travel.
all of the considerations, yeah.
Yeah,
I
what
do
about
love a good
you?
traveling dish. Yeah, getting ready, we're getting ready. We've got our little punch list. We do sort of a family get-together, some family get-togethers, and, yeah, we have kind of our list made, and it's kind of like its own whole little mini production getting ready for all of that. So, yeah,
It
it's
is,
just one of
but
those things. Yeah. Once we get there, I love the chaos of the kitchen. We were just talking about that today at my office. We did sort of a Friendsgiving. Once again, this
mhm.
is being recorded just before Thanksgiving. And we had a kind of an office function during lunch. And there was two camps of people at my office. There was one camp that was super nervous with this super chaos going on with all the ovens and just everybody running everywhere's in my office. They were really not not good with the chaos. And then there was the other camp at the office that was totally good with the chaos. So
Did
it was
those
an it was
was it
interesting.
split between people who have children and people who do not have
You
children?
know what? I never thought of it that way, but it kind of was that. People that have kids were used to chaos, so we were totally fine with it. I was
Yeah,
good with just chaos of people running everywheres, timers going off, maybe a smoke detector here and there. We were
yeah.
fine with all of that.
It's
Yeah.
it's fun to see, like, families how like, I think at Christmas too, especially, like, as your family changes, right? Like, all the grandkids grow up, right? And now
Mhm.
you're having Christmas, and it's not, like it might not be quieter, right? It might still be loud, but it's
Yeah.
not chaotic, right? Because everyone is, like, an adult to a point, right? But then you start bringing in, like, those great-grandbabies or other small children, and
Yeah.
then you see it slowly morph from, like, that first one where they might be playing with the paper to, like, now we have several, my grandma has several great grandchildren who would come, and now it's gone back to that chaos, but it's like a good chaos, right? So
Oh,
to
yeah.
just to see that cycle through of, like, really calm Christmases to, like, now back with
Yeah.
lots of small children and
Yeah, and you
being
just,
very chaotic
and
but
I
a
used
good
to be like,
chaotic.
yeah, I like the calm, sorta controlled, but, as soon as I had a kid, I'm realizing that that is not especially when my
Let
son
it
was
go,
younger.
right?
Just let it go and embrace the chaos and don't get tore up about anything because it at some point, it is what it is, and it has a life of its own. So,
Mhm.
that is the holidays with a Z, DAZE, holidays
That's
is
right.
what we call it because it's a blur, and I just encourage everybody to enjoy every minute of it if you
Mhm.
can at all. So, good times, good
Goes by
times.
fast, but
It
good
does go
stuff.
by fast, extremely fast. But today, a short topic, as I said, a little bit shorter topic than we typically do. And this is one that it was my turn to come up with the short topic for the first holiday episode. And what I figured I would talk to you guys a little bit about today is something that I used to do in the past and really enjoy when I lived in the eastern foothills and mountains of Kentucky, as I had a small shiitake log operation. Shiitake is a mushroom. Literally, shi means oak, the oak mushroom, I guess, and uh, originally came from Japan years and years ago, back in history. But the shiitake mushroom, and it can be grown many different ways. But many years ago at the University of Kentucky, we had a specialist that wrote a whole series of publications. Dr. Deborah Hill, a great specialist that worked with a lot of non-timber forest products in the eastern part of the state. Specifically, she covered the entire state, but she did this whole series of publications on growing shiitake mushrooms on natural logs. And I will
Mhm.
kind of differentiate there because you can grow mushrooms such as shiitake and oyster mushrooms and commercial production systems on sawdust substrate, sterilized substrate, and there's some other production systems. But what we were focusing on, and what I focused on when I grew them was growing them on natural logs. But that was the system that I was using, and I had access to a lot of timber products, and I had my own wood lot of about 65 acres. So yeah, I had
And
lots of trees.
that's key for this, process 'cause
It is. It
I offered
is.
a shiitake mushroom class that not this past March, but the year before, and while it was super cool and it's an easy process to do, the most stressful thing for me was finding wood, like, finding the right types of tree, right? 'Cause it
Yes.
has to be oak. Is there other ones that you can use as well?
There's several. There's oak, and then there's ash, and there's things like hickory, and we've learned that you can use sycamore, and some of the maples are appropriate. The only thing that you can't use is evergreens. Things like cedars, any kind of evergreen does not work well because there's sort of the nature of the way that wood grows and the resins that's in there doesn't let the mushroom colonize the logs very well. But yeah,
Mhm.
there's several logs that'll work. But now I was doing that when I was an agent in the eastern part of the state that was the most forested county in the state of Kentucky. It's about, I think, is 80 some plus percent forested in the eastern part of the state. But I moved from there
Yeah,
to the
what's your county
least
now?
the least forested county in the state. So now, Jessica, I'm with you, and I do occasionally do these mushroom workshops as a county workshop here in Bourbon County, where I'm currently an agent. But that's the one thing we have to consider first and foremost is getting the wood. And I say logs, but when Jessica and I are talking about logs, Jessica, I don't know about you, but when I say logs, it's first of all live live standing trees.
Mhm.
Nothing, you can't really go out and cut anything that's dead or damaged because that's already going to be colonized by other natural fungi, and that's
And
not going to work.
that's a good point too, like, it needs to be harvested at a certain time, right?
Yes,
So
yes. So when we say logs, we're talking about what I don't know how long you cut yours. You can cut any length, but really it's about because you're hand handling these things. You don't want them to be too big. So 3 or 4 feet in length,
mhm.
and I liked mine about 4 inches in diameter, kind of through. I didn't want them much bigger than that, even though I had some 5 and 6 inch, logs. But if you take a 5.5, 6 inch log that's 4 foot long and it's white oak, that's super heavy when you
Yeah,
first
for
cut it.
sure.
And you handle a couple hundred of those in a day, and I swear that'll be the only time you ever cut logs that big. So what I used a lot of is when I was doing kind of timber thinning in my own wood lot when I was doing it personally was I even used a lot of limbs from larger trees, and I tried to stay 3 or 4 inches live standing wood. When I'd cut that and or cut smaller trees, I would cut those up and I would get shiitake logs out of those. If it was living, the bark was intact. It made a good shiitake log out of some of the tree species that Jessica and I just mentioned.
Mhm.
So that's kind of what you start with. But yeah, Jessica, you asked about the timing, and the timing is really important. You want to cut the logs at a time when the sugar content is the highest in the logs, which is typically after the leaves have fallen off the trees. And I would go out during the summertime. That was my first thing getting involved with shiitakes. And the first thing when I'm talking to new producers that are interested in this, I tell them if you're not really good at identifying trees by the bark, you go out during the summer, make sure to mark your trees. And if you flag your trees with like plastic flagging tape, you can even write on there oak, maple, hickory, whatever. You can more easily identify those with the leaves on. But the
It's a
time
good
that you
idea.
actually, yeah, and I had people doing that because some of the tree species, like a red oak and a white oak, I don't think it really matters. I had great luck on both, but I would even mark the different types of oak if I knew what it was based on the leaves. But
Mhm.
once those are marked, the next thing you're doing is cutting those after the leaves have fallen off in the fall. Now, I would harvest trees at two different times here in Kentucky. One was late fall and one was early spring. Both are appropriate, but keep in mind, and Jessica already mentioned it, you want fresh logs. From the time that I would cut those logs, I would try to drill them no longer than 2 weeks after they were cut. The reason you want to do that is you want to get your mushroom spawn, and we can talk more about that in just a minute, what we mean by mushroom spawn. You want to get that in the log before natural funguses start to attack the log and colonize them because it's sort of an arms race. You want to get your mycelium and mushroom spawn in
Yeah,
there
yeah,
before it's
you wanna
naturally
colonize
colonized.
it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
otherwise you're going to grow some mushrooms that aren't what you seeded in that log. You're going to get some random
Right.
stuff in there, and that's not what you want.
You'd
That's
be
that's
very
not.
disappointed after you do this whole process and
Ye-
wait. The waiting time,
Yes.
which we can get more to that as well.
Yes.
Um, but yeah, for me, when I offered that class, like, the most stressful part was, like, just getting the logs, and luckily, I had a local tree company that I worked with before and helped out with some stuff come through that, a lady was having a big, beautiful, oak tree cut down from her yard because she was worried about it being too close to her house, and then the tree company said, "Oh, it looks like a very healthy tree that we're taking down,"
Mhm.
and so they were willing to give me all of the logs that went with that tree as long as I would let their wife in the class, and I was like, "Done. Do you wanna be in the class
Yeah.
too? I'll take it all,"
Yeah,
So,
absolutely. Yeah.
um, but that I feel like that's I for me, that was the most challenging part, but like you
It
said, depending
is.
on where you
Yeah.
are,
Yeah,
it
it
might
really
not be
does.
challenging.
If you're listening from a part of the country or part of the state here in Kentucky where there's lots of woodlots, then you'll have a much easier time than if you're in the central western part of the state where you may be in a big row crop county, for instance, and there's not a lot of stands, extended stands of trees that are appropriate species. So it really all depends. So if you're not cutting your own logs, you'll want to look well in advance and talk to someone. Like I'll approach woodcutters when I see advertisements for woodcutters. I will call them and say, hey, listen, here's my specifications for a 4-inch diameter log that's 4 foot long. Can you cut me some of these for X amount of dollars? So I've had some luck in the past with contacting a few months in advance woodcutters, and I've had some luck with that.
Nice.
Doing that, but you have to kind of work with those folks well in
Mhm.
advance. If you don't have your own woodlot and you're not cutting these things yourself,
So
yeah,
you mentioned drilling in the logs. So you got your logs, and the next step is, and you said mentioned like you putting your spores in, right? So you can
yeah.
order spores, right? Like so, like
Yeah.
I
And
mean,
that's a question we get a lot because people are a little bit nervous at first when we first introduce the concept of drilling a natural log and putting mushroom spawn or mycelium into the log. We're like, no, it's there's companies that sell these things, and it I kind of compare it to seeding a tomato. It's a known strain, and it's important to know that if you're working with if you just look it up online, spell out shiitake mushroom spawn, you're going to come up with some companies, probably close to you that sell these things, but it's a known strain of shiitake. And you're going to get questions from these supply companies. They'll say, well, which zone are you located, or what's your zip code? And then they'll ask you a few more questions. Based on what you're trying to do specifically, because there's different strains of shiitakes. Particularly there, when I was doing it, I used a wide temperature strain, but now there's some specialized strains that do a little bit better. They'll flush a little quicker, or they will inoculate better in colder weather. So there's different strains of shiitake mushrooms, and whatever your order source is for those things, just be prepared. They're going to ask you a few questions based on when you're going to drill, what are you going to drill, and what are you expecting for timeline and stuff. So
Mhm.
yeah, when you're colonizing the log with this mushroom spawn, you're ordering something that's almost like a tomato seed. But it's a known thing. It's not like we're going out into the woods and collecting some
Have
random
a
spawn and
surprise
bringing it back.
mushroom.
No, yeah, surprise mushroom. So, typically, what it looks like when you have your logs is, you get it up on some kind of bench or working height. There's lots of variations of how we lifted the logs. I use like little, stands for the logs, but you get it up on there, and then you need a drill because you're drilling with a specific size drill, and your order company will help you with this because they have all
Mhm.
of these supplies too. Not only do they have the spawn, they'll have, which you don't need a lot of specialized equipment if you're only drilling a few for yourself, but if you're doing hundreds of logs, they'll have things like high speed drills, angle drills with special angles to make it easier on your wrist. They'll come with drill bit stops, high speed drill bits, and all the other supplies that go along with doing like a commercial operation of shiitakes. But if you're just doing a few yourself, or maybe just two or three logs, just a
Yeah,
few
just
logs.
have some backup
Yeah.
batteries ready to go for the drills.
Yeah, batteries are great, but they run out really quick
Yep.
because you're drilling a lot of holes in a kind of a pattern up and down the log. We won't get into a lot of details of that, but there's you're drilling rows of holes up and down the logs, and the number of rows is based on the diameter of the log. So a 6-inch diameter log will have more rows of holes than a 4-inch diameter. There's just this formula, but the rule of thumb is you're going to be drilling a lot of holes. So
Mhm.
batteries, I've never had a lot of luck, even with the commercial battery systems. So I always used corded drills. So you're drilling a bunch of holes, and you're buying spawn in one of two common forms. There's some other forms, but the two main forms of spawn either comes on wooden dowels that you then bang into these specific size holes, or you can purchase sawdust spawn, that you have a special little plunger tool that you purchase. That's kind of a specialized tool that if you're using sawdust spawn, you need this tool to then put in the holes. So that's how you're inoculating the logs. You're drilling the holes, and then you're using wooden dowels covered with spawn, or you're using sawdust. Um,
And then you need to
and that
cover them, right?
Yes, you
To
need to cover them with.
seal moisture.
Yep, to seal in the moisture, and also the temperature of, it's food grade wax is what it amounts to, paraffin wax or cheese wax. I forget which is it's a food grade wax that
Yeah.
is sold also by the mushroom supply companies, and you're heating this, to a given point, and what I always did was I just use, like fry daddy pots, or, some kind of a fryer pot, oil fryer pot, and I would set that to a certain temperature. But these are high smoke point waxes, food grade waxes. And since you have an exposed surface, remember the name of the game is you want to exclude all other funguses. So you're sealing in the hole that seals in moisture and gives the shiitake mushroom time to colonize the log, move into the log, but it also sterilizes and covers that hole, minimizing any kind of contamination
Mm.
risk. So you're kind
And
of doing that.
do you think, from what I've heard, uh, that the spawn, like the sawdust version, does it colonize quicker
I've
than
always
the plugs, you
It's
think?
sort of anecdotal. I've not seen any research on it, but we've had this discussion with different producers, bigger producers, and I think so. For
Well,
me, it tended to.
yeah,
Yeah.
Alexis and I did some logs at, like, the same time,
Mhm.
and I had, the little plugs. That's what I had for my class that I did, and she had just, some of, like, the sawdust, and
Yeah.
mine finally, as Ray knows, the other day, we got my very first, shiitake mushroom. We were just super excited because my little boys helped hammer those in, so one
Oh,
of my
yeah, big
sons
fun.
remembered doing it. but Alexis had, like, got mushrooms, like, the year before mine, so
Yeah.
mine was, like, a full year behind hers,
And
so
there's a lot of factors like tree species makes a big difference too, because the typical time, let's say that I didn't do a fall drill, I didn't do fall logs, I did spring logs in March. Sometimes with if I'm using something like a tulip poplar tree, it's a softer wood, it colonizes easier. The mycelium of the mushroom can move through the log, colonize quicker. I've actually gotten logs that I drilled in March. I would get logs producing mushrooms in December, like
wow.
really quick. Now my oaks were typically a little slower, but no matter what, if I use sawdust spawn, they tended for me personally to colonize faster. The Dow
So
spawn worked just fine, but the I don't know, I've just observed that myself.
yeah, so is it about a year from the time you get it, or is it a couple
Yeah,
of yeah,
well,
like, timeline for them? I know environment has a lot
ideally,
to do with it too.
yes, environment's got a lot to do with it. The strain of spawn that you're using has a lot to do with it, and they can give you an estimated time. Your place that you're working with can give you some idea of how long, but best case scenario, 12 months. More typical scenario is 18 months.
Mhm,
In fact, if I would have, for instance, if I would have drilled this fall, it may be like the following fall or the following spring after that fall, 18 months. Before you get anything. And that's more typical. Now, if you've got several logs, there's a way to sort of structure the production a little bit to where you know when they're going to produce. And did you guys soak your logs, Jessica, when you had logs?
I did just with one of them to test it out because I
Hmm.
was thinking like, "Oh, we're at a year and I don't have anything," but in
Yeah.
reality, that was okay. And I guess just so we don't skip ahead, I know a big question I always had in the class, "Okay, we did these, we drilled them, we covered them with wax, where do we put them? Like, where like, what's the best place to stick them while we wait for mushrooms to develop?"
Yeah, once you drill them and once you've waxed them, the next thing I would always do is I would take aluminum tags. You can cut up an aluminum can, or you can actually purchase little square aluminum tags from the order source. Once again, that you're getting your spawn from. You just ask for aluminum tags, but I would staple those just using a standard staple gun to the ends of the log, and I would put like if I ordered, like from Field and Forest. I'm just, that's one of the order sources, one of many. But I would put F and F, and then I would put the strain of shiitake that I used and the date that I inoculated that log, because I'm going to look at that later. And after 12 months, that's going to let me know that I can start to force that log. There's a way you can force the log to fruit. So I tag the logs and then I take them to a location that's high humidity. The densest shade that you have, the highest humidity location that you have, that's really important, because remember, shiitakes are a living organism. They need things like we need. One of those things that very critical things is moisture in the logs, really, really super important. So you're looking for dense shade and high humidity. Down low next to a creek is great because you tend to have a little bit higher humidity in locations like that, not right in the water. But I had my logs that it was close to a creek and it was dense shade. That's important places to put your logs. If you put them out in full sun and you don't water them like with a soaker hose
Mhm,
during really dry periods, what's going to happen is all of your spawn's going to die in your log, or most of it's going to die, and you may or may not ever get any mushrooms. Yeah.
mhm.
So that's sort of the next step is storage, because like Jessica said, it's at least going to be 12 months before you see anything at all in that log. And the next question people have is, well, how do you know that the mushroom, spawn is working? If you look at the ends of the log, you'll actually see them start to turn white. And that's actually the mushroom itself. That's the mycelium. Whereas
Mhm.
the actual mushroom that you see and eat, that's more of you could call that the mushroom's bloom almost. That's a
Like it's
reproductive part of the
flour, right?
yes, it's almost like it's flower, where the actual mushroom plant per se, that's in the log. That's the mycelium, the tiny little
That's
threads of
what gave me
mycelium.
hope with mine was that I saw that, and because also where we have been in droughts, if you have been in Kentucky, these last 2 summers have been kinda hard. I watered them, like, every day when I was watering my plants.
How
Every
did you
day.
water them? Did you just, like, sprinkle
I
them with,
just I
some
just
water?
soaked them like, with the hose every time. With part of my
Yeah.
normal watering of all my annual containers that I have, I would go over to where they were located, which I had them under, like, a big tree where they got pretty much all shade under there and even are kinda shaded in the winter from, like, the house and
Oh.
stuff, um, and then would just soak them every time as I
And
walk
that
past.
and people that do that, you kinda pay attention if you have them in a spot
Mhm.
where you're gonna see them and you can remember to water them. If you got a water source nearby, it's the people that basically have the most consistent luck with these. And, to test my logs to see if they're getting enough water, I mean, you've handled these things, so you know what they feel like when there's maximum moisture in there when you drill them. That's maximum moisture. And if you go by and you fill your logs, let's say in June or July, and they're super lightweight, that's a problem. That means they're drying out too much. That means you may consider a shade cloth. You may consider soaker hoses, or like Jessica did, you may just kind of go through with a sprinkler. Any way that you can get water on there, the slower drip, the better. But anyway, you can get moisture in that area of the logs and on the logs, the better,
Mhm.
as that mushroom is colonizing the log for those 12 to 18 months. And if you're a homeowner, you may never force the log to flush. You may see it every day. And then all of a sudden, you notice during the cooler months, typically once in the spring, naturally, and then once in the fall, there'll be roughly two flushes per year, one spring, one fall. And that's when the temperatures start to change. The moisture is going to be highest in the log. And that's when the mushroom is basically doing the best. And as the temperatures start to warm, you have high humidity, warm past freezing. That's when you're going to have your natural flushes. But it's hard to tell when that's going to happen naturally, I guess,
Yeah.
Jessica, isn't it?
Yeah, we were really so like, I've checked those things all the time, and then it was just a couple weekends ago, we finally discovered I had 2 shiitake mushrooms on a
Yeah.
log, and we were just ecstatic about that, like, so excited because, like, didn't think that anything was, happening with them.
Yeah.
So, there's hope now, there's hope that that'll flush again, right? And that,
Yeah, that definitely is in
the
there.
other
I mean,
ones.
you've got shiitakes, so yeah. And a log, a hardwood log will last, depending on the size of the log, but 4 to 5 years on average. Maybe if it's something like a softwood, like a tulip poplar, it'll last a little bit less. But I've had 6 inch, once again, they're a little too big, but I've had 6 inch white oak logs produce beyond 7 years.
Wow.
That they actually the hardwoods, they produce a little longer, but your average lifespan of a log is 4 to 5 years, just on
Wow.
average. And once you start to see that production, if you're just going to let them naturally flush, just start watching in the spring and pay close attention in the fall. The biggest problem with growing these things, if you let them naturally flush, is sometimes you'll miss the flush. And the way that you tell when the mushroom is, I guess, for lack of a better word, ripe or ready to harvest, is if you look at mushrooms, and shiitakes are an example of this type of mushroom, they're going to sort of be closed. The edges of the mushroom are going to be curved down and tucked under and attached. Now, you'll want to harvest those shiitakes before that mushroom cap completely flattens out and the edges completely open up, because that's a little bit overripe. You want to harvest them before that, when the edges are still curled under. That's when you want to harvest, if you're really paying attention to that. But what I like to do, and what I was doing because I had several logs, is I would force them. And when people say forcing shiitakes on natural logs to flush, that just means typically you're soaking those in something like a stock tank for 24 hours. And that does a couple different things. It changes the temperature of the log, and it introduces moisture into the log. There's some other things going on, but that's two of the big things that causes that log to then flush several days later. And I don't know, I've had them flush after I soak them for 24 hours in the spring on my first flush. Let's say it's a log I've had for a couple of years. I force it in beginning the third, fourth week of March. I will soak them for 24 hours, and 7 to 14 days later, I'm harvesting mushrooms pretty regularly.
Hmm.
And that's your first flush. And you can do that again in about 8 weeks. Let your logs rest, for 8 weeks, then do it again, your second flush in 8 weeks, and then you can do it for a third time. So you get three flushes at least 8 weeks apart if you're doing the soak system. And I like the soak system because I have better production and I actually can control somewhat when those logs are going to flush so that I can pay attention to them so I don't miss the mushrooms.
Yeah.
And my natural logs that I didn't flush, I would get busy doing other stuff and I would forget to look. And then I would come and find a bunch of mushroom mummies, just dried up
Oh,
mushrooms. And
that's
that
so
was very
disappointing.
disheartening.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was very
Does do
disappointing.
those logs last as long? The ones that you flush?
I didn't see much of a difference because
Well, that's cool if they
the
do.
natural aging process, the decay process isn't really affected that much that I personally saw by flushing them 3 times versus letting them naturally flush
Mhm.
twice. So I didn't see much of a difference in the overall breakdown of the hardwoods, especially.
Yeah.
I'm sure if I kept a tulip poplar logs long enough that soaking process may break those softwoods down quicker, but I didn't observe much of a difference. I just was getting more mushrooms
Nice.
with the flushes. So this, and I use stock tanks, but if you're lucky and you have a pond or a hole of water next to a creek, anything you can do to submerge the logs. The hard part is actually submerging the logs underwater
Yes. Yeah.
because you have to use some kind of weight to weight them down because they float, they start to dry out, and they're very buoyant. So you've got to really hold those down, and that was the
Mhm.
toughest thing for me, finding something heavy enough to lay on the stock tanks that it just wouldn't pop back up. The logs wouldn't pop to the top.
Yep.
So that's the way that I grew shiitakes and got my shiitakes is I would drill in the fall and seed either in the fall or early spring in March. And then just like Jessica said, you sit them somewheres in the shade, you kind of forget about them except for watering during dry periods. Some get water on there as much as you can. And then 12 to 18 months, you can begin to either look for the mushrooms naturally or you can go through the flushing system and control the cycle a little bit. Almost all commercial producers of shiitakes that have a lot of logs that they flush. That's just so they can get more mushrooms and they can control the process.
Yeah.
So
Well,
yeah,
very cool, Ray. Like, you taught me a lot more
I
about
know you
shiitake
you guys have
mushrooms.
grown them yourselves,
So
and I
well,
love the process. It makes a great workshop, doesn't it?
it does. It is a fun workshop. Like I
Yeah,
said, if as long as you have that source for logs, then you're good. You're good, but it does make a really fun workshop.
it's
So is
great.
there anything else you think you need to share about shiitakes today?
No, that's it. To Jessica nailed the most important thing. Just identify your logs depending on where you are in the state. If you have a little chunk of wood that fits the description that we gave you, that it's fresh and bark's intact and it's living, and you just have I mean, you could cut, I don't know, technically a 10-inch little chunk of wood, and I've done that and drill it, inoculate it, and you've got just a little chunk of wood that's producing mushrooms. It's
That's
amazing.
awesome.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
So fun stuff, guys.
Yeah, good topic today. So I think like our next topic, we might be talking a little bit about holiday cactuses and what's the difference between a Thanksgiving, Christmas, Easter, if you didn't even know there was an Easter cactus out there. But that wraps up today. I do not remember everything that Alexis says at the
Nor do
end
I.
of our podcast. Besides, check out the show notes, follow us on Instagram, reach out to us different ways if you have any questions, because we love hearing from you and love having your comments. So, thanks for joining us today. We look forward to you hearing us on the next one. I almost said seeing ya. So,
Yeah. Yeah. See you all. Thanks so
yes,
much.
thanks.